The glass tower pierced the skyline like a knife. From 32 stories up, the city looked small, almost manageable. Inside, the boardroom stretched wide and gleaming, all chrome edges and white marble floors that reflected the late afternoon sun. 20 executives sat around the oval mahogany table, their laptops open, screens glowing with spreadsheets and projections. The room buzzed with tension. At the head of the table, Richard Halloway, CEO of Stratagem Global Capital, cleared his throat. Silver-haired, sharp-suited, and always in control, he had built a reputation for one thing: closing impossible deals. This afternoon, the stakes were higher than ever. They were about to vote on a $4.6 billion merger with Titan Logistics, a shipping giant with reach into 40 countries. If approved, Stratagem's stock would soar, and bonuses would be legendary. If it fell apart, so would Halloway's legacy. But the center of attention wasn't the numbers. It was a woman. Across from Halloway sat Dr. Maya Sinclair, the firm's recently hired chief strategy officer. At 37, she was already a legend in the finance world, recruited from a top consultancy where she had designed billion-dollar turnaround strategies. Her reputation preceded her, calm under fire, mathematically brilliant, and unflinchingly direct. She was also the only black woman in the room. Every eye flicked between Maya and the spreadsheets she'd prepared. Her analysis had exposed deep flaws in the Titan deal. On paper, it looked like a gold mine. In practice, it was riddled with hidden liabilities, underfunded pensions, and lawsuits buried in footnotes. She tapped her laptop, and the main screen at the end of the boardroom lit up. Charts and red flags filled the display. If Stratagem merges with Titan at the current valuation, Maya said, her voice steady, we won't see profit until year 8. That's assuming no regulatory penalties. With existing lawsuits factored in, the break-even point could stretch to 11 years. In effect, we're paying to inherit a sinking ship. A ripple went through the room. One or two directors shifted in their leather seats, uncomfortable. At the far side, Brad Whitman, head of global operations, mid-50s, Harvard tie always loosened just enough to suggest arrogance, let out a sharp laugh. There she goes again, Brad said. Always the pessimist. We've heard this kind of doomsday talk before, and it never pans out. The market rewards boldness, not fear. Maya didn't look at him. She clicked to the next slide, a breakdown of Titan's debt obligations. This isn't fear, she said evenly. It's math. If we move forward, we'll be over-leveraged by Q3 next year. Debt to equity would spike past acceptable thresholds, triggering a downgrade from Moody's and S&P. That means higher borrowing costs across every division we own. Logistics, energy, fintech, all of it. Our credit lines shrink, and we become vulnerable to a hostile takeover within 3 years. She let the silence sit. Numbers didn't blink. Brad leaned back, smirk curling at the edge of his mouth. Listen, Maya, we all appreciate your thoroughness. But sometimes you can't see the forest for the trees. That's why leadership is about instinct. Titan has reach, Titan has muscle. Their white glove in Europe, boots on the ground in Africa, and their political contacts in South America alone are worth billions. What you're showing us is, well, it's academic. The word hung in the air like a blade. Academic. Translation. Out of touch. Ivory tower, not a deal maker. A few directors chuckled softly, aligning themselves with Brad. Others avoided eye contact, unwilling to pick a side. Maya's face betrayed nothing. She advanced another slide. Titan's African division, she said, is under investigation for labor violations. They've been cited in Kenya, Nigeria, and South Africa for wage theft and unsafe conditions. They've settled twice, but fresh litigation is underway. If we merge, those cases become our problem. Tell me, Brad, how exactly do you plan to spin forced labor into a growth story? The chuckles died instantly. Brad's jaw tightened. He glanced at Halloway, who hadn't spoken yet. The CEO's expression was unreadable, but his eyes flicked between Maya and Brad like a referee waiting for the right moment to blow the whistle. Look, Brad said, his voice harder now. We can't nickel and dime every risk. That's what insurance is for. What matters is momentum. Optics. Investors are salivating over this merger. We don't need to drag this into a social justice seminar. There it was. A soft snicker from 2 seats down. Social justice seminar. The coded language was unmistakable. Maya had heard it 100 times in 100 rooms. Translation. The black woman is making it about race again, except she hadn't mentioned race once. She had mentioned debt, lawsuits, and forced labor, things that would cost the company billions. Her eyes scanned the table. She knew who was listening and who was pretending not to. Some were secretly on her side but afraid to oppose Brad, the golden boy who'd been with Stratagem for 2 decades. Maya folded her hands. Facts aren't optional. They're not feelings, and they're not politics. They're the foundation we build on. Ignore them, and you don't just sink the deal. You sink the company. A sharp tap-tap of a pen broke the silence. It was Annika Desai, the firm's general counsel, one of the few women of color besides Maya. She looked directly at the CEO. "Richard," she said softly. "She's right. If even half these liabilities come to light post-merger, we're looking at shareholder lawsuits, breach of fiduciary duty, SEC breathing down our necks. This isn't optional diligence. This is survival." All eyes shifted to Holloway. For a moment, he said nothing. He just tapped his finger on the table, slow and deliberate. Brad couldn't help himself. "With respect, Richard, we can't let fear-mongering derail years of negotiation. This is the kind of hand-wringing that keeps us small-time. We have the chance to play with the giants, and we're about to throw it away because—" He stopped himself, but the sentence had already revealed its shadow. "Because a black woman told us no." Maya knew it. Everyone in the room knew it. The air thickened, charged. Then Richard Holloway finally spoke. His voice was calm, even casual, but it carried weight. "Brad," he said, "sit down." Brad blinked. "I am sitting—" "No," Holloway interrupted. "Sit down metaphorically. You've had your say. Let Dr. Sinclair finish." The words hit the room like a thunderclap. Maya continued her presentation, laying out not just the risks, but an alternative strategy, one that involved smaller acquisitions in renewable energy logistics, positioning Stratagem ahead of competitors chasing outdated shipping routes. It was bold, forward-thinking, and most importantly, financially sound. By the time she finished, the room was silent. Holloway leaned back, steepling his fingers. He scanned the faces of his board, then spoke. "We vote in 10 minutes. The decision would determine not just the future of the merger, but the balance of power in the room, and in Stratagem Global itself, and beneath the polished table, beneath the spreadsheets and projections, the oldest battle in corporate America simmered just beneath the surface. Whether truth and talent could ever outweigh the reflexes of prejudice." The vote came down hard. 8 directors sided with Maya's analysis. 7 sided with Brad. 2 abstained, citing the need for further diligence. The merger with Titan Logistics was officially shelved, pending further review. On paper, it was a win for Maya. In practice, the war had only begun. The boardroom emptied slowly. Chairs scraping across marble, muted conversations trailing out into the corridor. Investors would need explanations. Titan's lobbyists would be furious. And Brad looked like a man who had swallowed fire. As the last of the directors filed out, Brad lingered, his fists clenched behind his back. He approached Maya, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "You've made a career mistake," he hissed. "Don't think for a second this will be forgotten. You embarrassed me. You embarrassed this firm. There's a cost for that." Maya met his eyes, unflinching. "I don't deal in ego, only in facts. If that embarrasses you, Brad, maybe you should ask yourself why." His smirk twisted into something darker. "You think you're untouchable because Richard's flavor of the month? Newsflash. People like you are always temporary. Window dressing. Diversity hires. You'll learn." He walked out before she could respond, but his words hung in the air like poison. Outside the boardroom, conversations buzzed like hornets. Directors on phone calls, assistants shuffling papers, the endless hum of corporate machinery. Maya stepped into the hall and immediately felt the shift. Some executives gave her curt nods, others avoided her gaze. The silence was louder than the whispers. Annika caught up with her near the elevator. "You knew this was coming," she said. Maya pressed the button for the 20th floor. "Of course. But knowing doesn't make it easier. You humiliated Brad in front of his kingdom. He'll spend the next 6 months trying to bury you." Maya gave a faint smile. Then I'll spend the next 6 proving I belong here. Annika shook her head. Belonging isn't the question. Survival is. The first shot came less than 24 hours. Later, Maya opened her inbox to find a forwarded email chain from Brad. It wasn't meant for her. She had been CC'd by mistake, or so the cover note claimed. The thread was between Brad and 2 regional directors, dissecting Maya's analysis of Titan. Overblown, Brad had written. Fear tactics from someone who's never built a real deal. Classic academic overreach. Looks good on paper, useless in practice. Then the knife. She's good at finding problems, not solutions. That's what happens when you prioritize optics over experience. Optics. There it was again? The coded word. Maya stared at the email for a long time. She could confront him. She could forward it to Holloway. But she knew how this game was played. Brad wasn't stupid. He would never put something explicitly racist in writing. It was always veiled, wrapped in professionalism. Plausible deniability baked into every word. She closed the email and filed it away. Evidence, not fuel. By the end of the week, the whispers had started. Maya's too rigid. Maya doesn't understand market instinct. Maya's too academic. None of it spoken directly to her face. Always drifting back through third parties. Colleagues she'd mentored suddenly became distant. Invitations to after-hours drinks and golf outings stopped arriving. And then there was the meeting she wasn't invited to. She found out through an assistant, a strategy session on alternative paths after the Titan deal stalled. She was the chief strategy officer. Strategy was her job. Yet her name wasn't on the attendee list. Annika pulled her aside later that evening. Brad's behind it. He's building a coalition. The goal isn't to beat you in a meeting. It's to isolate you. Make you irrelevant, Maya exhaled slowly. Classic marginalization. Pretend the target doesn't exist until the room forgets they ever did. You have 2 options, Annika said. Play defense and survive, or go nuclear and burn his credibility to the ground. Maya looked out the window at the city lights below. Somewhere out there, Titan logistics executives were plotting their next move. Somewhere, investors were betting on her failure. She made her decision. 2 weeks later, Stratagem hosted its annual investor dinner at the Four Seasons. A black tie event, champagne flutes and foie gras, speeches about growth and stability. It was more theater than business, but reputations were cemented in rooms like these. Maya arrived in a charcoal gown, understated but sharp. She worked the room with precision, shaking hands, asking questions, listening more than she spoke. By the time she reached the head table, she had already collected fragments of gossip. Brad was telling investors that she was overreaching and slowing momentum. The host tapped the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our CEO, Richard Holloway. Applause thundered. Holloway spoke briefly about the firm's successes, its resilience, its future. Then he gestured to Maya. And none of this would be possible without the brilliant work of our Chief Strategy Officer, Dr. Maya Sinclair. Her insights have saved this firm billions in potential risk. Polite applause. Cameras flashed. Maya smiled, thanked Richard, and gave a short address about sustainable growth. She kept it sharp, data-driven, and irrefutable. When she finished, the applause was louder. Louder than Brad had expected. Brad clapped too, but his eyes were daggers. Later that night, Maya's phone buzzed. Unknown number. She stepped outside into the cool evening air before answering. Dr. Sinclair? A voice said. Male, smooth, accented. Yes, who is this? Let's just say I represent parties very interested in Stratagem's future. We were impressed by your analysis of Titan. Very impressed. You've saved your firm from catastrophe. But you've also made enemies. Powerful ones. Be careful, Dr. Sinclair. You're playing in a league where rules don't protect people like you. The line went dead. Maya stared at her phone, heart steady but mind racing. Whoever it was, they weren't wrong. She slipped the phone back into her clutch, straightened her shoulders, and re-entered the ballroom. The battle lines were drawn, and she was ready. The following quarter was a battlefield disguised as business as usual. Meetings rolled on, slideshows flickered across screens, reports were filed and reviewed. But beneath the polished surface, currents of hostility pulled hard. Brad Whitman moved with the confidence of a man sharpening knives in plain sight, and Maya felt the edges every day. It began with small exclusions, her name missing from email threads where critical decisions were made, accidental scheduling conflicts that kept her out of client dinners, whispers that she was too academic to understand market realities. These were corporate daggers, clean and deniable, but sharp all the same. What unnerved her more was the silence from people who knew better. Directors who had supported her in the Titan vote now ducked her in hallways, afraid of being caught in the crossfire. Loyalty and stratagem was transactional, and Brad had been buying it for 20 years. He had protégés across every floor, people whose promotions bore his fingerprints. They owed him, and they paid in silence. Maya poured herself into work, producing strategy decks that forecasted energy transitions, fintech disruptions, and geopolitical risks. They were airtight, meticulously sourced, and forward-thinking. Yet when she presented them, she noticed the same pattern: polite nods, muted applause, and then Brad leaning forward with his drawling rebuttal. "Interesting theory, Maya," he would say, voice dripping with condescension. "But let's be practical." His word practical was always code for ignore her. The fact that his counter-arguments were often thin, sometimes even mathematically wrong, didn't matter. What mattered was that he spoke the language of familiarity, old boy confidence, handshakes at golf courses, war stories from Harvard, and that language still carried weight in rooms like these. Her credibility was under siege, and she knew it. But she also knew something Brad didn't. Investors outside the boardroom were watching her closely. After the investor dinner, 3 major funds had reached out quietly, asking for her views on sustainability plays. She gave them insights that saved them millions, and word spread. "Maya Sinclair has vision," one portfolio manager told another, and soon her phone buzzed regularly with requests for private briefings. It was dangerous ground. Executives weren't supposed to freelance opinions to investors, but she played it carefully, couching her advice as academic perspective rather than strategy. Even so, she felt the ground shifting. The more Brad tried to undermine her internally, the more her reputation grew externally. That tension could only snap in one of 2 directions. The first real blow came in the form of a leak. A confidential memo she'd drafted about restructuring Stratagem's African investments appeared, almost verbatim, in a financial blog notorious for scoops. The memo warned against overexposure in unstable regions and highlighted human rights risks tied to Titan's operations. By the time she woke up that morning, the story was everywhere. Stratagem exec opposes expansion, cites human rights risks. Within hours, Titan's lobbyists were hammering Holloway's phone, accusing Maya of sabotaging the merger talks that still lingered in limbo. Brad seized the moment. He circulated internally that Maya was careless, possibly even disloyal. "What kind of chief strategy officer lets proprietary analysis walk out the door?" he said in a meeting, his tone righteous. Nobody could prove she hadn't leaked the memo, but the doubt was enough. Her inbox flooded with cautious inquiries from directors. Holloway summoned her privately. Richard's office overlooked the river, a wall of glass behind his desk. He gestured for her to sit but didn't offer coffee. "Tell me the truth, Maya. Did you leak it?" She met his gaze. "No, but someone wanted it to look that way." His eyes narrowed. "Brad?" she shrugged. "He benefits the most, but proving it is another matter." He sighed, leaning back in his chair. "You've made me enemies, Maya. Enemies with resources. I brought you here because I needed fresh eyes, not because I wanted another war. But war is what you've got." She let the silence linger before answering. "Then we fight it the right way. Not with whispers. With performance. With facts." Performance became her shield. Over the next 2 months, she spearheaded a renewable logistics project that outperformed projections by 40%. She cut waste in 2 underperforming divisions, freeing $180 million in capital. Every win was quantifiable, undeniable. And every win made Brad's fury sharper. He started undermining her openly in meetings, raising his voice, rolling his eyes, referring to her analysis as Sinclair's Theory Hour. More than once, he said the word quota loud enough for everyone to hear. Never directly at her, always at the ceiling or the table. But the implication was clear. She wasn't there on merit. She was a checkbox. The first time she ignored it. The second time she leaned forward across the table and said, "If you have something to say about my qualifications, Brad, say it on the record so it can be noted in the minutes." The room froze. Brad chuckled. "Relax, Maya. It's just a joke." But nobody laughed. Even his allies were uneasy. The escalation wasn't just internal. External actors began circling too. Anonymous calls to journalists suggested that stratagem was divided, that the board was at war with itself, that a radical social agenda was threatening to derail profitable deals. Maya's name was often in those articles, framed as the spoiler. She knew Brad's fingerprints were there. He was using coded language, radical, academic, optics, to mark her as an outsider without ever saying the word black. It was a familiar script, centuries old, replayed in marble boardrooms instead of cotton fields. The pressure mounted. Her days began at dawn, her nights ended past midnight. She could feel the isolation gnawing at her. Colleagues she'd once trusted now hesitated before speaking to her. Invitations still didn't come. Even Annika warned her. "They're trying to burn you out. They'll bury you in work until you crack, then call it incompetence." Maya nodded but kept going. She had faced harder storms before, but she also knew storms left wreckage, even if you survived. Then came the quarterly earnings call. Investors dialed in from around the world. The room was packed, cameras ready. Holloway opened with the usual metrics, then turned the floor to Brad to discuss operations. Brad delivered his usual confident performance, weaving numbers and anecdotes, painting a picture of growth. When he finished, Richard looked at Maya. "Dr. Sinclair, would you like to add?" Brad stiffened. Maya rose, her voice calm. She presented the renewable logistics project, showed the savings, displayed the growth curve. The investors murmured approval. One asked a pointed question. "Dr. Sinclair, if Titan Logistics were back on the table, would your view still be negative?" She didn't flinch. "Yes, the liabilities haven't changed, but neither has our capacity to outgrow them with smarter, sustainable plays." The line crackled with applause emojis and muted claps. Investors were impressed. Brad's jaw tightened. Afterward, as people filtered out, Brad cornered her by the elevators. "You think you've won because you dazzled them with pretty charts? This isn't about charts. This is about power. And power doesn't like outsiders." She met his eyes. "Then maybe power needs new owners." It was the first time he didn't have a comeback. But Maya knew silence didn't mean surrender. It meant escalation. The next battle would be dirtier, and she would need more than data to survive it. She would need allies, evidence, and a strategy that not only exposed Brad, but forced the entire board to confront the cost of racism itself, not as an abstract moral failing, but as a financial disaster waiting to happen. And in Stratagem Global, money was the only language that could kill prejudice without apology. The breaking point arrived on a Tuesday, disguised as routine. The board had convened for a closed-door review on international expansion, with Titan's shadow looming larger than ever. Though the merger was technically stalled, Titan's leadership continued lobbying, offering sweetheart deals to Stratagem executives and whispering promises of personal enrichment. Brad championed them with renewed vigor, presenting glossy projections that dripped with optimism. The atmosphere was tense, every director weighing profit against principle. Maya sat silent through Brad's showmanship, her eyes fixed on the thick binder in front of her, the product of 2 months' work. Cross-referenced by analysts she trusted, data double-checked until it screamed with clarity. She hadn't shown it to anyone, not even Richard. To bring it out now was a gamble, but gambles had built empires, and she was done playing defense. Brad finished with a flourish, leaning back in his chair like a man awaiting applause. Titan's growth trajectory is undeniable. Rejecting them again would be irresponsible to our shareholders, he declared. Murmurs of agreement fluttered around the room. Richard steepled his fingers, his face unreadable. That was when Maya slid her binder onto the table and stood. "With respect, Brad, what you've shown us isn't a strategy. It's marketing. I'd like to present reality." A ripple moved across the room. Several directors straightened, intrigued. Brad smirked. "Reality? Don't keep us waiting, Sinclair." Her voice was steady as she walked them through the numbers. She revealed Titan's off-balance sheet debts, hidden through a web of subsidiaries in countries with lax reporting laws. She projected how their over-leveraged model would collapse under the next oil price dip. She highlighted lawsuits quietly filed in 3 African nations over labor abuses, each one with potential damages in the hundreds of millions. Every slide stripped Titan of its sheen, exposing rot beneath the polish. The directors shifted uncomfortably. By the time she reached the environmental liabilities, oil spills, cleanup costs, regulatory fines, Brad's smirk had hardened into a glare. Then she delivered the dagger. "Gentlemen, ladies," she said, pausing to let the silence stretch. "Brad speaks of shareholder value. But if Titan merges with us, our stock price collapses within 18 months. Not because of politics. Not because of ideology. Because of math." She flipped to the final slide, a projection showing a 42% decline under Titan's model versus a 27% gain under Stratagem's independent renewable strategy. The contrast was brutal. Numbers didn't lie. The room was dead still. Richard leaned forward. "You're confident in this analysis?" She met his gaze. "Confident enough to stake my job on it." That statement landed with the force of a gavel. Brad burst out, "This is fear-mongering!" "She's cooking numbers to kill a deal she never supported." "This is personal." Maya turned to him, her tone cutting. "If you're so sure, Brad, then open Titan's books to independent audit." "Let us see what's hidden." Gasps flickered through the room. Independent audit was a nuclear option in deals like this. It would either prove Titan solid or expose them. Brad blanched, then tried to recover. "That's not standard practice." Maya smiled thinly. "Neither is leading a company into collapse." Directors whispered to each other, and the tide shifted visibly. For the first time, Brad was on the defensive. Richard called for a vote, whether to pause talks with Titan pending an independent investigation. One by one, hands rose, at first hesitant, then firm. Brad's allies raised theirs reluctantly, unwilling to be seen resisting accountability. The motion passed by overwhelming majority. Brad sat frozen, his jaw tight, eyes locked on Maya with naked fury. She had cornered him with facts, with numbers, with the very language he claimed as his own. And the board had listened. But the meeting didn't end there. As papers shuffled and directors prepared to leave, Richard cleared his throat. "There's another matter," he said. "Recent leaks, hostile press, and rumors of division have damaged us. It is unacceptable. I intend to get to the bottom of it." His eyes flicked to Brad. "And I will not tolerate sabotage from within." Brad bristled. "Are you accusing me?" Richard's voice was steel. "I'm saying this company needs unity, not vendettas. Maya has proven her value. It's time we act like leaders, not politicians." For the first time, Maya saw fear in Brad's eyes. Not anger, not arrogance, but genuine fear. He knew the ground had shifted beneath him. His whispers, his coded slurs, his quiet sabotage, they had worked in shadows. But she had dragged the fight into the light, and in the light, truth burned hotter than rumor. The aftermath was immediate. Investors hailed Stratagem's commitment to transparency. Stock ticked upward. Journalists who had once painted Maya as a spoiler now lauded her as the strategist who saved Stratagem from disaster. Emails flooded her inbox, not of caution, but of congratulations. The isolation that had weighed on her lifted as colleagues began openly aligning with her. Allies emerged from corners she hadn't expected. Directors, managers, even interns who whispered, "We're rooting for you." For the first time since she joined, Maya felt the company shifting. Not fully, not permanently, but shifting nonetheless. Yet she also knew the war wasn't over. Brad was too entrenched, too connected to vanish quietly. Men like him didn't lose gracefully. They regrouped, found new angles, struck back harder. But something fundamental had changed. For the first time, Brad had been forced onto defense. For the first time, he bled, and in the corporate jungle, blood drew predators. That night, as she walked out of Stratagem's gleaming tower, the city lights blazing below, Maya paused to breathe in the cool air. She wasn't naive. Racism didn't end with a vote or a binder of data. But for once she had flipped the script. The narrative was hers, the spotlight on her terms, the balance of power no longer one-sided. The war would continue, yes, but she had made them see what they had tried so hard not to. that racism wasn't just immoral. It was expensive, and in a world ruled by capital, expense was the one sin no corporation forgave. The week after the board vote, Stratagem felt different. The air in the corridors carried a strange electricity, the kind that comes after a storm. Debris still scattered, but the sky clearing. Brad's allies no longer swaggered through meetings with the same ease. Their jokes were muted, their glances cautious. Whispers rippled through departments. Brad had been checked. Nobody said it aloud, but the balance of power had shifted. For years, he had been the immovable force, the gatekeeper, the man who decided who rose and who fell. Now people saw cracks. And in the corporate world, once cracks appear, the structure never quite looks invincible again. Maya sensed the shift, but remained vigilant. She doubled down on discipline, arriving early, leaving late, scrutinizing every document. The binder that had undone Brad had not only protected Stratagem but also elevated her reputation across the industry. Calls poured in from analysts, journalists, even government officials asking her opinion on energy policy. She declined interviews, careful not to be seen as grandstanding, but every declined request only amplified her mystique. Colleagues began treating her less like an interloper and more like a leader. Even Richard, who had once warned her of enemies, now sought her counsel openly. The tide was with her, but tides are fickle things, and she knew Brad was plotting beneath the surface. The first counterstrike was subtle, an anonymous whistleblower complaint filed to regulators accusing Stratagem of misleading investors about environmental risks. The language echoed phrases Maya had used in her presentations, making it seem as if she had double-spoken, sounding alarmist in the boardroom while downplaying risks in filings. Regulators sniffed blood and opened a preliminary inquiry. The boardroom grew tense once again. Richard called her in privately. "They're targeting you, Maya. They want the regulators to see you as inconsistent." She folded her arms. "Then let's be consistent. Open the books. Full disclosure. If our filings are clean, we have nothing to hide." He hesitated. That level of transparency could spook investors. She leaned forward. "Not as much as a scandal will. If Brad planted this, expose him with sunlight." Richard agreed reluctantly, and the audit began. Weeks of combing through environmental data, contracts, and financial disclosures followed. Maya worked with compliance officers night and day, ensuring every number aligned, every risk clearly reported. When the regulators finally released their findings, Stratagem emerged not only unscathed but praised for exemplary disclosure. The supposed complaint backfired. Journalists speculated on the source of the false whistleblower. Insiders pointed fingers. Many pointed at Brad, but Brad wasn't finished. His next move was bolder and riskier. He arranged a quiet dinner with 3 directors at his country club, pitching them on a leadership realignment. Word leaked back to Maya through an ally who overheard staff gossip. Brad wanted her demoted under the guise of refocusing on academic partnerships. It was classic strategy. Don't fire her outright, but sideline her into irrelevance. Maya considered confronting him, but chose a different path. She gathered evidence. She compiled a dossier of every hostile act since she joined. The leaked memo, the anonymous articles, the whistleblower complaint, even transcripts of his quota remarks whispered during meetings. She had corroboration from emails, recordings, and witnesses willing to testify off-record. It was a risky trove, but in the right hands, it could end him. Her chance came at the next quarterly governance session, when the board reviewed ethical compliance and leadership integrity. These sessions were usually perfunctory, a box to tick, but this time Maya requested the floor. Brad smirked when she rose. "Another lecture, Sinclair?" He sneered. She ignored him, placing a slim folder on the table. "This is a record of hostile conduct within Stratagem over the past 12 months. It includes leaks of confidential data, attempts to discredit executive leadership, coded racist remarks in official meetings, and actions that placed shareholder value at risk." She spoke evenly, every word deliberate. "I believe this conduct not only violates our code of ethics, but exposes the firm to reputational and legal liability." The room went dead silent. Richard looked stunned. A director asked, "Do you have evidence?" Maya slid the folder across. Every page is documented? Brad lunged forward, face red. This is outrageous. You're fabricating to save yourself. She turned to him calmly. If I'm fabricating, then you'll welcome an independent investigation to clear your name. The challenge landed like a hammer. Once again, the nuclear option, investigation. Brad sputtered, then fell into angry silence. The board voted unanimously to appoint an external firm to investigate. Brad stormed out before the vote concluded. The tension in the room was suffocating, but Maya felt the weight shift further. She had forced his tactics into daylight. No more shadows. Over the following weeks, investigators interviewed employees, combed through emails, reviewed financial trails. Rumors swirled through Stratagem's halls. Some feared the company would fracture under the scrutiny, but when the report landed, it was devastating for Brad. Investigators confirmed his involvement in leaking Maya's memo, his anonymous briefings to journalists, and his orchestration of the false whistleblower complaint. Worse, they found evidence of conflicts of interest. Brad had undisclosed ties to Titan's board, including private payments disguised as consulting fees. He wasn't just sabotaging Maya, he was betraying Stratagem itself. The board convened an emergency session. Brad sat at the far end of the table, defiant but cornered. Richard's voice was grim. Brad, the evidence leaves us no choice. Your actions constitute gross misconduct and breach of fiduciary duty. Effective immediately, you are removed from your role. Brad exploded, pounding the table. You can't do this. I built this company. I carried you all for decades. And you're replacing me with her? A token hire who's played the victim from day one. His words hung in the air like poison. The directors recoiled. For years he had hidden his racism in jokes, whispers, insinuations. Now under pressure the mask slipped. The naked contempt in his words was undeniable. Maya didn't speak. She didn't need to. The board saw what she had always seen. Richard's voice cut through the silence. You've revealed yourself, Brad, and you've revealed why leaders like you cannot be trusted with the future. Security escorted him out, his protests echoing down the corridor. A chapter had closed, not cleanly, but definitively. The resolution rippled outward. Investors cheered the removal of a compromised executive. Stratagem's stock climbed, buoyed by confidence in its renewed leadership. Journalists hailed the decision as a rare instance of a corporation addressing racism and corruption head-on. Internally, the culture began to thaw. Employees spoke more openly about bias, about silence, about the cost of complicity. HR reported a surge of anonymous testimonies from staff who had endured discrimination for years but never felt safe reporting it. Policies were revisited. New oversight committees were formed. Change was imperfect, halting, but real. For Maya, the victory was bittersweet. She had toppled a giant, but the fight had come at enormous cost. Months of stress, sleepless nights, isolation, constant scrutiny. She carried the scars quietly. At the same time, she recognized the magnitude of what had been achieved. This wasn't just about her career. It was about shifting an institution. It was about proving that racism wasn't an untouchable force when confronted with truth and courage. That evening, Richard joined her in her office, carrying 2 glasses and a bottle of scotch. He poured in silence, then raised his glass. To survival, he said. She clinked hers lightly. To more than survival, she replied. To change. He studied her for a moment, then nodded. Brad's gone, but there are others. Men like him don't disappear with one firing, she smiled faintly. Then we'll deal with them, one by one. She watched the city lights again that night, the skyline sharp against the darkness. For the first time since she'd joined Stratagem, she allowed herself to breathe. Resolution didn't mean the war was over, but it meant she had shifted the balance. She had turned a fortress of prejudice into a battlefield of accountability. And in that battlefield, she had won. 6 months after Brad Whitman was escorted out of Stratagem's tower, his absence still echoed in the corridors. For years, his voice had dominated every meeting. His shadow loomed over every decision. Now the air felt lighter, though not entirely clean. Change had come, but corporations are slow beasts, weighed down by habit and history. Maya knew this. She had never believed one man's fall would cure systemic rot. But she also knew something undeniable. The silence had been broken. Once a fortress has cracks, light seeps in. And light spreads. The first signs of ripple were cultural. Younger associates began speaking more openly in meetings. Analysts who once sat silent now challenged directors on assumptions. In the cafeteria, conversations about bias and equity surfaced not in whispers, but in debates. Stratagem introduced mentorship programs pairing senior executives with underrepresented staff. For the first time, promotions included diversity metrics, not as token gestures, but as performance criteria. Some rolled their eyes, others called it progress. Maya watched it unfold with cautious optimism. It wasn't perfect. There were still dismissive jokes, still private resistance. But the atmosphere had shifted. People were no longer pretending not to see. Externally, Stratagem's reputation transformed. The press branded the company as a case study in corporate accountability. Business schools dissected the Titan debacle in classrooms, citing Maya's strategy as an example of leadership under fire. Conferences invited her to speak about sustainable growth and inclusive leadership. She accepted a few invitations but declined most. Fame was never her goal. She had seen what came with visibility, the targeting, the scrutiny, the personal cost. Still, she couldn't ignore the platform. At one keynote in London, she told a packed hall, "Diversity isn't charity. It's foresight. When you exclude voices, you don't just silence people, you blind yourself to risk." The audience erupted in applause. Clips of her words spread across networks, inspiring young professionals who had felt invisible in their own companies. Brad, meanwhile, tried to reinvent himself. Whispers circulated of consulting gigs, think tank roles, even a startup advisory board. But none lasted. His name had become radioactive, a cautionary tale in the language of investors. Don't pull a Whitman. Rumors of lawsuits followed him, tied to his Titan conflicts. In one particularly brutal article, a journalist wrote, "Brad Whitman rose as a titan of finance and fell as a relic of prejudice. The market has no nostalgia for men who confuse arrogance with vision." Maya didn't rejoice in his downfall. Schadenfreude wasn't her style, but she recognized the significance. For once, a powerful man faced consequences, not just for financial missteps, but for racism itself. That, she thought, was history, however small. But victories carried weight, too. Maya felt the exhaustion in her bones. She had survived war, but war leaves scars. There were nights she still jolted awake, remembering the leaks, the rumors, the way her colleagues' silence had cut deeper than Brad's insults. She carried the loneliness of those months like a stone, Annika noticed. Over coffee one morning, she said, "You won, Maya, but don't forget to live after winning." Maya smiled weakly. "Living feels like another job." Annika squeezed her hand. "Then make it a good one," she tried. She traveled for the first time in years, not for conferences, but for herself. She spent 2 weeks in Ghana, visiting the bustling markets of Accra, the slave forts at Cape Coast, the tech startups sprouting in Accra's Silicon Alleys. Standing in the dungeons where her ancestors had been chained, she felt a shiver of history connecting the brutality of the past to the battles of the present. Racism had worn many faces, chains, laws, policies, whispers, but the thread was the same: dehumanization. Yet here she stood, a black woman who had stared down a corporate giant and won. The echo of her fight reverberated further back than she'd ever imagined. When she returned, Stratagem was in the middle of another storm. Not a scandal this time, but a crossroads. Energy markets were shifting faster than anyone predicted. Fossil fuels wavered, renewables surged, and global regulators pressed for accountability. The board turned to Maya not as an outsider, but as a compass. She drafted a 10-year sustainability roadmap that became Stratagem's North Star. When it was unveiled at the annual general meeting, investors cheered. Some even called it the Sinclair Doctrine. She laughed at the grandiosity, but inside she felt pride. Not in the name, but in the permanence. Her ideas had become institutional. Still, change never comes without resistance. Older executives grumbled about social agendas and overcorrections. Lobbyists tried to pull Stratagem back toward quick, dirty profits. And racism, though quieter, still whispered. A casual slight here, a raised eyebrow there. But now, when those moments surfaced, silence didn't follow. Others spoke up. A director once close to Brad interrupted a dismissive comment in a meeting, saying bluntly, "That's not how we operate anymore." It was a small act, but small acts accumulate. For Maya, it was confirmation. She wasn't fighting alone anymore. Years passed. Maya became more than chief strategy officer. She became a symbol. Business schools taught her case. Young professionals sought her mentorship. Media still tried to crown her the woman who beat racism in the boardroom. She hated that phrase. Racism wasn't something you beat once. It was something you confronted endlessly. But she accepted the platform, reshaping the narrative. "I didn't beat racism," she said in an interview. "I proved it's expensive. And that's what corporations understand." The clip went viral, quoted in essays, echoed in protests. She had distilled a painful truth into a single sentence, and it stuck. Brad's name, meanwhile, faded. His legacy became a cautionary anecdote in ethics courses, a footnote in stratagem's history. He had once believed himself untouchable. Now he was forgotten by the very system he thought would protect him. Maya often reflected on that, not out of vengeance, but as proof of impermanence. Power built on prejudice crumbles. Always. One evening, years later, she returned to Stratagem's boardroom, this time as chairwoman. The skyline glittered outside, the river dark and steady. Around the table sat a new generation of leaders, diverse, sharp, ambitious. Some were young women of color who had grown up hearing her story. She studied their faces and felt something she hadn't felt in years, hope unburdened by exhaustion. When the meeting adjourned, one of them lingered behind, nervous. "Dr. Sinclair," she said softly, "I just wanted to thank you." "I'm here because of you," Maya smiled. "No, you're here because you're brilliant. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." Walking out into the night, Maya thought of the long arc, from Brad's smirk in that first meeting to this moment of quiet triumph. Echoes stretched across years, across histories, across continents. The fight wasn't over. It never would be. But victories leave echoes. And sometimes those echoes grow louder than the voices that once tried to silence them.